So I've been having a discussion with some guys over on Inspiring Philosophies. A recent post he did, he's got Dr. David Falk on there talking about the Exodus. And the problem here is Inspiring Philosophy, okay? In my opinion, he's doing a very dishonest thing, and he's trying to put it off on Josh Bowen and Kip Davis. Now, in order to establish this, I want to show you something, okay? One of the scholars that Inspiring Philosophy, Mike Jones, is using is Richard Elliott Friedman. And he's taking advantage of the fact that you guys have no idea what Friedman is saying. So real quick, here's Richard Elliott Friedman's view of the Exodus. The Exodus is only the Levites, okay? It's not the rest, or the Levites, I guess you said. It's not the rest of Israel. It's only the Levites. The rest of Israel's already up in Canaan. They are not biologically related, nothing. So in Richard Elliott Friedman's view, the Exodus is very small. I don't want to put a number on it, but I would think he would say less than 1,000, certainly, probably around 100 people. And they're only the Levites, okay? The Levites come up from Egypt to Canaan to join the Israelites who are already there. His argument is that the word Levite means attached people. So they're not part of Israel originally. They join Israel and become an attached people. This would be why they don't have any land, because they came after the Canaanites had already identified as Israelites and divided up the land amongst themselves. All right? So we all on the same page here. That's obviously not the view that Mike Jones has. So he brings on David Falk, and David Falk makes this mistake based on, in my opinion, I don't know, I'm not behind the scenes, but I assume David Falk is playing fair here, but he's been misled by Inspiring Philosophy. So watch what happens here.
Fluff. I wanted to get to something that's actually substance value. And so Kip is going to be reading this extended quote from Richard Elliott Friedman. And because I just want to respond to something that has substance in it, actually talk about the conquest, Friedman makes an argument here via Kip that is just not a good argument. So let's play this.
Circumcision. In this case, our archaeological evidence indicates that no such arrival of conquering masses ever took place. The destruction layers are just not there on the sites. And our earliest source, the Song of Miriam, which appears in Exodus chapter 15, does not mention it. Where do we find a destruction layer? Where we do find a destruction layer is at the site of the city of Hazor, but that fits better with the account of Deborah's defeat of the king of Hazor, which is in Judges chapter 5, to which we referred to earlier, or it could have happened at some point at some other time. Without all the other cities, it does not add up to Joshua or a widespread conquest of the land. The archaeologists are right. There was no conquest. So this is Richard Elliott Friedman, the book that Chris Rolston cites in his blog post to say that this is essentially the position he agrees with. Now,
Okay, Rolston, Friedman agree with the position that the destruction at Hazor better fits with the destruction at the time of Deborah and Barak. Now, I just have a quick question, Dr. Falk. Why have you never considered the destruction that's mentioned in Judges 4? As you can see, doesn't it mention it right in here? Doesn't it mention it right now?
I don't see it. Can you point it out to me?
No, it doesn't. So this is an argument that early daters use, and
this is an argument that early daters use. Yes.
Judges 4 doesn't mention a second destruction.
No, and frankly, none of the field archaeologists mention an early Iron Age destruction at Hazor either. None of them. Ben-Tor doesn't. Yadin doesn't. Geva doesn't. All the people who've actually worked there, there is no early Iron Age destruction at Hazor. In fact, there is a consensus here. There is a consensus that the last major destruction at Hazor was Late Bronze 2B.
Right.
Okay? That's the consensus. And I'll even quote it as someone here, which is Shulamit Giva. The publication is from 1989. And the author writes, quote, although scholars have not yet reached full consensus as to the exact date of its destruction, all agree with the end of the Late Bronze Age and the decline of Canaanite culture. The area of the, quote, plateau was left desolate, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
Scholars, archaeologists are in complete agreement. That's based upon the presence of Mycenaean ware. That the destruction of Hazor is Late Bronze 2B, the end of Late Bronze 2B.
All right, I apologize for the pop-up in the video. I'm recording this on my phone. Now, let me explain for those of you who aren't tracking on this, aren't following. Here's what's happening. So you have the Exodus, which happens right around 1200, which is also the end of the Bronze Age. And so the Exodus is happening at the very end of the Late Bronze Age. And during the Exodus, they sing this song, the Song of Miriam, or the Song of the Sea, whatever you wish to call it. God has overthrown the Egyptians, horse and rider he has thrown into the sea, right? Great little poem, okay? So they sing this song during the Exodus at the end of the Late Bronze Age collapse. Then they come into the land, and they have the conquest, and then they have the period of the judges. Deborah would be what, the fourth judge, I think? She's a couple judges in. So you have to figure at least 100 years have gone by, and then you have the Song of Deborah, and this is about defeating a king. And Richard Elliott Friedman is saying that this, the Song of Deborah, is about the destruction of Hazor. And so you see the problem, right? If the Exodus happened at the very end of the Late Bronze Age and the destruction of Hazor happened at the end of the Late Bronze Age, then, as David Falk correctly points out, this destruction of Hazor couldn't have happened 100, at least, years later when Deborah is the judge of Israel. Okay? He's 100% right. The problem is, and again, I'm assuming that David Falk doesn't know this, Michael Jones does, because he keeps quoting in his Exodus series Richard Elliott Friedman. Okay, so Richard Elliott Friedman has a book called The Exodus. Excellent book. Love this book, where he explains his view on the Exodus. And so how could Richard Elliott Friedman get this wrong, right? He's a good scholar. How could he see Hazor as being destroyed in the Iron Age when all of the archaeologists involved, as David Falk correctly points out, put it at the Late Bronze Age? Well, we see how, okay? Richard Elliott Friedman does not believe that the Israelites were part of the Exodus. Only the Levites were part of the Exodus. So as the Levites are coming up out of Egypt, they sing the Song of Miriam. Horse and rider he is thrown into the sea. And nowhere in the song do they ever mention the name Israel, right? Meanwhile, simultaneously, up in Canaan, you have this group of people that is identifying as Israel, led by a judge named Deborah, who is defeating Hazor. So the Song of Deborah never mentions the Levites, and the Song of the Sea never mentions Israel, because they're happening at the same time. They haven't met each other yet, right? The Levites are on their way up to the land of Canaan. The Israelites are already there. That's Richard Elliott. Agree or disagree, fine. That's Richard Elliott Friedman's view on the Exodus. So when Richard Elliott Friedman says Hazor is associated with the Song of Deborah, he's not placing it in the Iron Age. He's placing it in the Late Bronze Age, simultaneous with the Song of Miriam, which is happening also in the Late Bronze Age during the Exodus. You see what's happening here? Now, Michael Jones quotes in his series on the Exodus, he quotes Richard Elliott Friedman several times. The problem is Richard Elliott Friedman does not agree with Michael Jones's timeline of the Exodus. But Michael Jones is using his research as if he does, which then misleads David Falk, presumably. I assume he's not part of this. It misleads him into saying that Richard Elliott Friedman is like, how could he get this wrong, right? How could Kip Davis get this wrong? How do they not understand? Well, they're not getting it wrong. Michael Jones is misleading you. He's making you believe that they agree with the timeline, that Richard Elliott Friedman agrees with his timeline just because Richard Elliott Friedman agrees with the small Exodus, right? But he doesn't agree with the timeline. He doesn't believe Israel had anything to do with the Exodus. It's only the Levites. They're the only ones in the Exodus. So the Israelites are already up there defeating Hazor as the Exodus crew, the Levites, are making their way up there. And that's where the confusion comes in. This is Michael Jones being very misleading, okay? I'm sorry, but he does this a lot. And so you guys sit here and go, our scholar's good, theirs are bad. See, he clearly got this wrong. Well, no, he didn't get it wrong. It's just that David Falk doesn't understand his argument. And if he did, I think he would say, oh, okay, well, that's possible. He'd disagree, I'm sure. But he would say, oh, okay, then I can see why he's putting this destruction with Deborah, since he thinks Deborah is actually in the late Bronze Age and not in the early Iron Age, right? Mike, clean up your act, bro.